coffee, big cup, and hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Gilmore Way Podcast. I'm Laura.
And I'm Kate. And this week we are back for part 2 of our discussion on Christopher Hayden. Originally, I wrote this as a 2-parter, and now it's going to be a 3-parter. Woohoo! So last week, we basically only got through Lorelai and Christopher's teen years and the Christopher Returns episode from season 1. This week, we're going to be diving a little bit more into seasons 2 and 3. We're going to be talking about Sherry and Gigi and how all of that sort of impacted Lorelai's relationship with Christopher. And then we'll also talk about, the baby shower and Dear Emily and Richard in all of that too. So without further ado.
Fair warning, this is a spoilers all podcast. So we are going to be talking about all of the episodes just mentioned, along with anything and everything from seasons 1 through 7. Including the revival, perhaps. You never know. So if you haven't seen any of that, go give the show a full watch through and then come back and join us. And please remember to do all of those YouTube things for us. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, share it with your family and friends. Any and all support is always appreciated. And as always, just a fair general cat disclaimer. If you hear kitty noises in the background, it is dinner time. It's playtime. That's what you get with felines, folks. So just stick with us.
Yeah, he wants his Friday night dinner.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
Yeah. All right. So let's start out with a quick discussion of the bachelorette party. Because as we know, where we left off was that Christopher has sort of proposed to Lorelai. She rejects him. He leaves, goes back to California. And then just a few weeks later, she's back with Max. And shortly after that, Max proposes, but this time she actually says yes. After a little bit of thought, she's like, yeah, let's try this. And they have a pretty quick engagement. And that brings us to the bachelorette party, where Emily tells this romantic story about her excitement the week of her wedding to Richard. And everybody goes off and calls their significant other because they're so touched by this story, and they want that for themselves, and they, call Jackson and Dean, and instead of calling Max, Lorelai calls Christopher. What were your thoughts about that? Like, what was your reaction when she didn't call Max but called Chris instead?
You should not be marrying Max Medina.
That.
Next question, please.
Yeah, it's like, and we're done. We're done with that. Yeah, no, it's like a whole quick conversation of like, oh, hey, I'm at a bachelorette party. Whose? Mine. She hasn't even told him that she's in a relationship or that she's engaged. She's just finished telling him a couple of months ago that, like, he's not ready for a family. And now she is, like, throwing her new one in his face a little bit, maybe. I don't think she meant it that way, but the fact that she called him instead is just like, oh boy, on a lot of fronts, the red flag. And, they have a fun banter back and forth. He takes a poke at Max's musical tastes and asks about him a little bit. Is like, is he a good guy? Like, and yeah, he is. He is a good guy. But then, what I love about this interaction is that Chris is like, if you think that you found the guy, that's great. As someone who knows you really well, I say congratulations. If you found the guy, I think that's great. And that's really good of him, considering his own feelings on the subject of her and getting cold cocked with this information. So
yeah, but
thumbs up from Kate.
Also yes, very much 2 thumbs up for Chris at this moment in time. But we have to ask the question, why is she calling him? And I think it's very telling that she says, I just wanted to share this news with someone who is very important to me, who means a lot to me. And that's great. But I don't think she's calling Chris as like, oh, I just want to share this news with my best friend or a cousin or just, someone who's important to me in my life in a platonic way. I think this phone call was also being made, maybe even because Lorelai was thinking or hoping or expecting, like, what is Chris's reaction going to be? Is he going to be supportive? Like, what she gets? Or is potentially Christopher going to turn around and say, oh, well, maybe rethink that marriage? Are you ready for that? And start instilling those doubts, not because Lorelai is potentially not ready, which she's not ready to marry Max. We can all agree upon that. But maybe she was, I think, a part of her hoping for Chris to say, like, oh, well, think about it, because if you marry Max, it pretty much negates us having a chance. And maybe that's what she was hoping to hear. I think that's kind of why that phone call was made.
I didn't even really think about that. I think it was just her subconscious. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you. I actually think that is a very good point. I just sort of always took it as her subconscious fears. And, when she was told about the excitement and the love and the warm, fuzzy feelings from Emily, I just always assumed that her calling Max was just sort of like a protective measure, because she wasn't feeling those things with Max and she was trying to avoid the feelings. And so she went to someone who was safe and comfortable for her, someone who's kind of always been there for her. And that was Chris in this moment. So, it was a rough one. And the fact that he had no idea about it, despite the fact that, this is her kid's dad, and she was about to be introducing a new stepfather. Well, not introducing, because she met him through Chilton, but you know what I mean, like introducing a stepfather into the household is a big change. And not that Chris necessarily has any say over the situation, but he should probably at least be clued in. And so the fact that Lorelai just absolutely left him out of the equation just goes to show how maybe self-centered she can be when it comes to her relationships, and how the feelings, we see it the same thing too with Emily and Richard. She doesn't tell her parents that she's engaged until it's too late, and they find out about it elsewise and are mad about it. And so Lorelai is very much just like, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to tell anyone about it. And I mean, I kind of get it in a way, but I don't have the same familial dynamics that they do. So, like, but yeah. Next up after that, we have Christopher calling Rory, telling her that Lorelai called him while she was drunk. And then, if you haven't seen part 1, go back and watch that, because I mentioned that, Lorelai is throwing it in Chris's face that he said, oh, I can't believe Rory ratted me out about the credit card getting declined when I told her not to tell you. And she's like, ratted you out? What are you, 16? But when she talks to Rory, when Rory confronts her about, like, why did you call Dad last night? Why didn't you call Max? And she was like, did he call just to think on me?
Mm-hmm. There's no hypocrisy here.
Not even a little.
No, but I mean, it's interesting to me that Chris calls Rory to tell her that. But I think it's also because, again, maybe even Chris is realizing that Max is not right for Lorelai. Maybe he even picked up on that within Lorelai's phone call to him throughout the drunkenness of that conversation. And maybe he's just, going to Rory because he knows Rory knows Lorelai the best, and he's trying to gauge the situation as if to say, like, hey, what is the dynamic that you're actually seeing between your mother and Max? Like, is there actual chemistry there? Because she's drunk dialing me, essentially. I have to question this right now, because this is not just going to be a decision that affects Lorelai and Max. It's going to affect Rory. If, again, like you said, Max is coming into the picture as a stepfather, maybe Chris is also now genuinely concerned, oh my gosh, Lorelai's bringing in a man into their lives who is not going to be good for Rory. So maybe he's just concerned there as well, and that's why he's also reaching out.
Yeah, and something I hadn't even really considered until right now is that maybe he was also asking Rory about her feelings about Max. It's just like, hey, so I hear, like, Lorelai's going to get married. How do you feel? What do you think about him? Like, he's going to be your stepfather. Like, what's your take on this? Obviously, we don't see a lot of their discussions behind the scenes because for some reason that's not relevant ever in a family drama, actually getting communication or any of that is unimportant. So that could have been a reason for the phone call. Again, as her dad, it could well be his place to reach out and say, hey, are you cool with this? Like, tell me now and I'll, my imagination of this dynamic would be like, tell me now and I'll try to get your mom out of it if we must. Like, but also vice versa, like you said, where like it could be him being like, maybe you should tell her to rethink this, like ask her if she's really sure.
Yeah, I think all of that was coming into play. And I think, I make this like allegory a lot, but I think it's just very relevant. Christopher was, rolling a high perception check at that point in time. And I think he was picking up on a lot of stuff that was probably going to end up being really problematic. And I think he was noticing it. So for the sake of Lorelai and for the sake of his daughter, I think he was not trying to harmfully intervene, but I think he was just, raising some concerns that are actually legitimate.
Yeah. And going back to what you said about drunk dialing, Lorelai does try to blame the Long Island iced tea. She says it packs a wallop, and someday Rory will meet it. Again, passing the buck for, granted, I have been drunk and have not made the best decisions. I haven't really, like, drunk dialed too many people, though. So, like, we're not on the same level with that. But, yeah, she tries to pass it off as like, oh, I was just drunk. It was silly. It meant nothing. Really, it meant nothing. But it sort of occurred to me earlier today. The acronym for Long Island iced tea, LIIT, lit. Mm-hmm. It's exactly what you are after you drink it.
Indeed. They're not joking when they say they'll sneak up on you.
It's true. I have had quite a night. There was this one bar in Vancouver that for a while was doing pictures of Long Island iced tea. Ooh. And that was like the best ever. I think it was kind of watered down, like it wasn't super duper strong. But they stopped doing it, I think, because people were getting too drunk. Understandably so. But yeah, they were like $15 pictures of Long Island iced tea. It was so good. That was a time in my life. Anyway, but yeah, so Lorelai is clearly not ready to accept Chris as a mature life partner in season 1. And she projects this onto him. But we see her struggle with Max, who's far more ready for marriage, ostensibly. And we see her struggle to integrate partners, not just Max, but a lot of her partners into her life. She has a hard time making changes or upgrades for other people. And it's her that's not ready to let anyone in, which is why she shuts out Max too. So yeah, it's she's not required to let anyone in. She doesn't technically need a husband or a stepfather for Rory. But I think it really goes to show that it comes from inside of her and may have little to do with the behavior of the guys. People say, it's a good thing she shut out Chris because he wasn't a great guy. But it's like, is he not a great guy, or is she just not willing to let him be her great guy? So, but that kind of brings us on to the next time we see Christopher, which is presenting Lorelai Gilmore when they invite him to participate in the debutante ball. Thoughts?
Yeah. Again, it just makes me love Christopher more. Like, he has no obligation to be there. Like, the phone call is made, Rory's attending a ball, it'd be nice to have you there presenting her, being present in that moment. I'm sure Emily and Richard would love it. That's kind of what is expected, is that the father is presenting the daughter. So if you can show up, it'd be great to have you there. I think Lorelai makes that phone call, not expecting Chris to necessarily say no, but bracing herself that it might be a no. And so when he just without hesitation says, yep, I'm there, just give me the date and time, I'm coming. You see Lorelai's reaction. She's like, oh, okay, great. Like, wonderful. So, this will work out. Shout out to Chris, just bonus points here. And it's something where obviously I feel like he probably doesn't want to do it. This is also something that is very much what Lorelai ran away from, the kind of lifestyle that Strobe and Francine would condone. Like, it's just very high society, high class, privileged stuff going on here. But he recognizes that it's going to be an important moment for Rory, so he's showing up for his kid. Like, what is their fault about that? Nothing.
Yeah, without hesitation. He has moved to Boston for, we learn later in this episode, another woman. And so that shows that he's committed, willing to take a big step for a romantic partner. And then we see him unhesitatingly agree to do this for Rory and to come out. And yeah, on your point about he doesn't really want to do it. Lorelai's like, I know you would rather sit through endless love than ever be part of this scene again. And then she's like, she has a mother who will hunt you down like a half-price Kate Spade purse if you disappoint her. So yeah, you can definitely tell that she is bracing for rejection, and she is trying to impress upon Christopher how important this is to Rory and her by extension, and Emily and Richard by extension. And he's just like, yeah, I'm in, I'll do it. And he actually shows up, and he is there for the whole thing. He doesn't, take off or balk at any of it. Like, it's just, he makes it seem easy and like he's been doing this forever. And like, maybe he hasn't, maybe this is a new thing for him, but, and I love that he shows up with an Oxford English dictionary. Mm-hmm. Like, he didn't forget. He ultimately came through and got her something he promised her. That is a big deal. That is, again, a $400 book. And he got her like the magnifying glass that goes with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you have to think as well, with him saying yes, there's a conversation that is going to have to be had between Christopher and Sherry, where he's going to have to tell her, hey, listen, Lorelai contacted me. Rory is having, a debutante ball. They've asked if I would come, so I'm going to need to take some time away from work, be out of Boston for a couple of days, leave you here, go attend to that. That conversation was going to be had. Sherry was going to have to know about it. So the fact that Christopher is so, I guess, trusting and settled now in his relationship with Sherry, where he's confident that, like, there's not going to be any jealousy or animosity here on Sherry's part, where she's going to have to question, why are you going back? Do you still have something with Lorelai? What is going on here? Just the fact that he's so trusting that Sherry is going to be accepting of the fact, like, okay, you're going back for your daughter. That's great. Have a nice weekend. Please wish her well with this affair. Just shows how much more stable Chris now is in this new relationship.
Yeah. I mean, when we find out as he's talking to Lorelai on a park bench, like, he has a job now. He's part of a company that helps other companies scale back. So he does, I'm guessing, some business management kind of stuff. We're still not sure what he did for college or whether he went to college at all, but he seems to have enough education to work in the tech sectors and to work in business. And eventually, again, skipping ahead a little bit, we find out in the revival that he has caved and gone into the family business, which is actually law. And at first I was like, how could he go into the family business of law when he never went to law school? But the last time I watched Fall, I noticed behind him on the windowsill, there was a statuette of Lady Justice and some brass scales as well. So he's definitely at a law firm. Like, they actually managed to keep the continuity on the family biz being law, but that's kind of neither here nor there. In this instance, he's working for another company and they do like software stuff and business management for those companies specifically. But this is a new thing for Lorelai. She's like, you have a job and a Volvo, and like, who are you? And he says, it's weird. I always hated the idea of having to be somewhere at a specific time, day after day. But as it turns out, I like the stability. It's a new revelation for both him and Lorelai in this. He's like, I actually kind of like going to work and feeling like I've accomplished something and feeling like I've earned something. It only took me 10 years and several failed business ventures to figure out what I wanted, which is not my parents' life. And so the fact that he's doing this on his own and he feels efficacious and like a contributing member of society has really helped him leap forward in his development. And, this really starts Lorelai off on a new path, a new set of feelings for Christopher. I think in season 1, we're still in immature Lorelai thinking that Christopher is still 16 and that he really hasn't changed. But now I think she's starting to realize that his offers in season 1 may have actually had some weight behind them and may have had some validity. And she's like, oh, you actually are like getting it together and doing the adulty things that we thought you were incapable of somehow. And so it's starting to shift her perception of him into someone she could see herself with. And so she sort of gets very like excited at this prospect. And by the end of the episode, she is overtly flirting with him. But obviously that's when he finds that moment to tell her about Sherry. And, you know, he has to tell her that he's with someone else, and Sherry is the one who has sort of encouraged him to, like, she made it clear that if I didn't get it together, that, you know, she was going to leave. And it just kind of goes to show that when Christopher is with a partner who actually has expectations and boundaries and a sense of maturity and what's expected in relationships, he can actually rise to the occasion.
Expectations? What are those?
I mean, in this case, they're a somewhat more healthy expectation instead of just like, oh, hey, figure it out, or, oh, hey, read my mind, you know? Like, yeah, we have some unrealistic expectations throughout the show, but this, I think, on Sherry's part is not unrealistic at all. It's very much needed, and it proves that Chris has the potential to be more than people have perceived him to be.
And it's exactly the kind of kick in the ass that he needed, because Lorelai was just so whimsical with just allowing Chris to like skate by and do whatever you want. And if you're here, you're here. And if you're not here, you're not here. Lorelai and I, or Rory and I, will be fine regardless, whether you show up or not. So, you know, it's still just all about us. And if you can get it together, great. And if you can't, then that's on you. And that sort of behavior coming from Lorelai was never going to allow Chris to mature and progress in the way that he so desperately needed to at this moment in time. Strobe and Francine were just not going to be helpful in that regard either. So he did need to be with a partner who was going to say, like, get your shit together or this relationship is not going to work, because we need that stability, financial, emotional, otherwise. So if you can't meet me on that level and hang around with me in this regard, this is not going to work, because then it will just perpetuate into something that is not good for either of us. So choose what you want this to be. And if you want to make this work, start working on yourself now to get to that point. For as much as Sherry was not great down the line after that, in terms of some of her choices, that was a really good thing that she did on her part to kind of get Christopher to snap out of it and get it together.
Exactly. And I would also like to point out, I mean, it might just be the way this conversation is written, but he doesn't say anything about Sherry making any specific demands of him to do anything in particular. But it's clear that their relationship is reliant upon him holding up his end of the bargain, which is something Lorelai never held him to. And like with her, there was never a bargain. It was just my way or the highway. I get to make all the decisions here. I'm the one who gets to decide when you're ready. Whereas Sherry was like, no. We're both adults in this relationship, and you have to like be a functional member of this relationship as well. So I don't know what exactly his behavior was that was not okay with her, in terms of like, she made it clear that I needed to get it together. Like maybe he was just still taking too many risks when it came to business, and she wanted something more stable, and she just needed more predictability from him. It's not super clear what that is, but obviously he did it, and they ended up staying together for several more months. So yeah, which kind of brings us to the next time we see him, which is in It Should Have Been Lorelai, which is another excellent episode. And, you know, Chris is in the neighborhood. Lorelai invites him to come to Rory's debate at Chilton, and you know, he's never been to her school. He's never been able to see Chilton up close, as he calls it, and experience the magnificence that is Paris Geller. Quite a time to be introduced to her. But he brings Sherry with him, and Lorelai's like, I can't believe he didn't tell me he was bringing her. Like, why didn't he tell me he was bringing her? And she's so obsessed with the fact that she's now here, and Lorelai has been blindsided and wasn't like prepared, I guess, to be her best self. I think, you know, she's obviously kind of jealous of Sherry, and then when she sees how beautiful and together and type A Sherry is, you know, she's like perfect hair, no wrinkles, hose wearing witch, and she's the kind of person that Lorelai will never be for all of her success and her well, like, does she get there in the later seasons? I don't think so. But like, you know, for as much as she would try, Lorelai will never be that person who has things that much together. Obviously, we know that this comes from a place in Sherry that is over intense and maybe kind of dark. It's not always a good thing, but she's very type A, very much has things under control. And I think that's a good influence on Christopher. I think he really learns from that. And I don't know that he would have learned those things from Lorelai, who herself, you know, often goes to Rory and is like, can we have ice cream? Like, don't bother studying. Who cares if you're, you know, if you pass your finals, but you're not pretty?
Yeah, it's all about you.
Yeah, exactly. And so Sherry is intimidating to her, and she just kind of shows up, and Lorelai doesn't have a chance to prepare for this or, you know, wrap her mind around it, and it really throws her off kilter.
Yeah, that is also, if I had to summarize that episode, capital I for insecurity, Lorelai Gilmore. Christopher was not obligated, nor do I ever think he needed to advise you on the fact that Sherry was going to be coming to this debate. Would it be something that is nice to do, cordial, you know? Sure. Just say like, hey, I'm going to bring Sherry with me. But not obligated to do so. This is your kid. This is who you're with now in life. You know, if things continue to work out, Sherry is going to be a part of Rory's life and vice versa. You know, especially again, once we start, you know, having Gigi come into the picture and the pregnancy and the baby shower, you know, Rory is forever going to be intertwined in their lives now because she's going to have a half sister. This is just the reality of the situation. But for Lorelai to react in the way that she does just speaks to an obnoxious level of insecurity where, like what you said, she is seeing Sherry as the woman that she will never be, more successful, holding herself up to her. All of it is just really, really bad and dangerous behavior. But it also just makes what is supposed to be something that is just a nice, supportive day for Rory in terms of both parents coming to this, you know, Chilton event turn into something that's just really, well, now it's just about like mom's having a meltdown because dad's bringing a new girlfriend.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I guess we kind of skipped over Bracebridge, but it was kind of the same thing where Lorelai had Chris call asking if Rory could spend Christmas with them, and she doesn't even tell Rory about it until, you know, the end of the night of the dinner, being like, oh, your dad invited you. And she's like, well, why wouldn't you tell me? And Lorelai goes off on a diatribe about, you know, Christmas is my time, you know, it's not their time. And it comes back to that idea of her possessiveness of Rory and wigging about Sherry, for lack of a better term. The insecurity and the jealousy is there from the moment she finds out Chris has a new partner. And it just stings even more for her because she's really starting to see something in Chris. And I'm wondering if it's the thing that Emily and Richard saw in him. I mean, obviously, Emily has some mixed feelings on him and Richard too. But I always wonder if Emily and Richard saw potential in Christopher that Lorelai didn't, because they're the ones who kind of keep pushing this. And I guess this brings us to Lorelai's fight with her mom in the kitchen at the end of the episode, when Emily is freaking out that Rory's not there because she's with Sherry. She's worried that Sherry will get her claws in, and this is how it starts. And can you really not see what's happening here? Are you just that humiliated or whatever to, like, I can tell you're heartbroken. All of these things that sound outrageous, but when you actually start to pick them apart, have a bit of truth to them. And yeah, I think Emily saw the potential in Christopher, in that he's always, well, Richard says this, but I think Emily sees it too. But the fact that he is the kind of guy who lives up to his responsibilities. We see it when Sherry gets pregnant and he goes back to her, and Richard is talking Emily down off a ledge in the first episode of the 3rd season. And so Emily starts to freak out at the fact that Christopher is becoming the best version of himself with someone other than Lorelai. And she calls Lorelai out on the fact that, it could have been you. Christopher gets his life together with this other woman. Like, you dawdled time away. You could have had that effect on him. You could have been the person to help him get his life together, but you made no effort. And, obviously there could be some internalized misogyny in this as well. But I have a more nuanced take on it. And, Lorelai is resistant, obviously. She's like, oh, so this comes down to something I didn't do? Don't put that on me, mother. And then Emily says, what other explanation is there? He's always been crazy about you, but you've always kept him at arm's length. You keep everyone at arm's length. So what is your take on that? Do you think it should have been Lorelai?
No, not in that moment, because Emily was right on calling her out and saying, like, listen, it could have been you and it should have been you, but you did not try. You did not put in the effort. Chris is now finally, again, trying to get his life together. He is with a partner who is pushing him in all of the right ways to try and, allow him to better himself. And that's what he needs. So, of course, at this moment in time, Christopher is going to be with Sherry because he needs that growth, and he is finally with a partner that is allowing for that growth to happen. That's not you, Lorelai, and it should have been you, but you didn't make an effort, because going back to what you said, you always kept everyone at bay. You never really allow anyone to get into your life and into your life with Rory. So when you keep people so distant and removed from you, how do you expect them to want to continue to get close to you and grow with you when they're just not even able to be present? So it was a hard conversation for Emily to have with Lorelai, because she wants them to be together, but she's also recognizing that her daughter didn't do enough or do right by Christopher to make that a reality.
Yeah, I mean, I think no woman is responsible for making him immature. You shouldn't have to be your husband's mom and holding his hand through absolutely everything. There has to be a point where anyone steps up, not just men, but like women too. Everyone needs to come to a place of maturity in their lives. It doesn't have to look like the traditional markers of adulthood, but it does have to do with, your willingness to deal with reality and to participate productively in the world, whatever that looks like. And so I don't think it was Lorelai or Sherry's responsibility to make Chris into the man that he became. But I think that there is at least a nugget of truth in what Emily is saying here. And that's why it stings Lorelai so bad. And like, again, on its face, it sounds wrong and judgmental and awful for her to even suggest that Lorelai should be responsible for this, and that Emily is putting this onto her, making it her fault, which is, it's a tactic they use quite a bit to keep Lorelai in line, is to accuse her of these things. But she's touching on a deeper truth here, and I don't like the way she delivers it. She could have done it without the judgment and without the finger pointing, but she gets to this small truth within all of this vitriol, which is the fact that You know, we all need some help maturing. Most of us need a model or someone to hold us to expectations, whether it's a boss or a family member or a partner or whatever. We have to interact with people in a mature and healthy way. And when you just write people off and say you're immature, you're not giving them a chance to grow. You're not giving them a chance to prove to you that they have what it takes, basically. And so obviously Lorelai and Chris were so young when this happened. Neither of them was truly mature. They're still not totally mature. But if she had given him a chance, he might have actually stepped up in the way he's doing now. And so I think it's maybe hurting Lorelai to recognize that when someone is there to provide Chris with stability and affection and expectations, that he actually does answer the call and that he is capable of these things. And so maybe she's regretting a little bit the fact that she never gave him that opportunity. They may still not have made it in marriage because they both carry their own trauma and their own baggage that might have made them incompatible in the long run. But in general, like, I don't know that Chris would have been as bad a husband or father if maybe Lorelai had at least tried it. Maybe they could have, even if they didn't get married, even if they had raised the baby together, or she had like really actively involved him in their lives. Maybe they dated, stayed romantically involved, but just not married. Things could have been very different, and Christopher would have been a much different person. We'll get more into it when we talk about him as a dad, but Lorelai deciding to do it on her own and cutting him out is part of why he didn't get his ish together as early as she did. And she thinks, you know, well, actually, I don't know if she thinks it makes her better or a more mature parent, but I think it makes us as the audience make it seem that way. When if you flip the script or if you change something in the past, I do think Chris would have stepped up and at least tried to be a real dad to Rory. I think, you know, we see constantly throughout the series, every time he shows up, he, you know, just wants to be there for them. He wants to be with Lorelai. He wants to be a dad to Rory. He wants to apologize and take responsibility for them insofar as he's able to. And so the fact that we're constantly seeing contrition from Chris on the fact that he wasn't there as much as he wanted to be or as he could have been, you know, I think that shows a lot of growth on his part. And now Lorelai is being forced to contend with the fact that if she had maybe just let him in, if she wasn't so avoidant, that maybe their lives could all be very different or their relationships could be very different. And it's a painful piece of self-reflection that she doesn't want to do. She's feeling blamed and defensive, and so she is blocking that out. But like I said, there's just a tiny nugget of truth in what Emily is saying, and it hurts for her to recognize that.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's just displacement of blame, because just bouncing off what you said, Lorelai cannot and does not want to contend with the fact that she could have and should have done better in this scenario and a bunch of other scenarios within her life. She just can't take it a lot of the time. And it's a really immature response to have that definitely she needs to work on. But she will displace that blame to try and absolve herself because she just can't reckon with all of this. And that's why she, like you said, it stings what Emily says. That's why she is so bitter to Sherry showing up at this Chilton event and at this debate, why she lashes out at Christopher about it, because it's not about Christopher and Sherry. It is about her at the end of the day and how insecure and dissatisfied she is within, I think, a lot of aspects of her own life.
Yeah. And backing up a little bit, before they even get to the dinner, Lorelai is grilling Chris about like, well, you know, single pronouns only. Why didn't you say we instead of I? And he's like, I didn't do that on purpose. I didn't think it was a big deal. Like, she's been with me the whole time. I brought her. What's the big deal here? And, you know, Lorelai is kind of going off about the awkward conversation they had in the kitchen. And she's like, you know, just by the fact that, you know, Rory exists means like I'm gonna be in your life, and he's like, well, you didn't think to do the same for me. So like once again, it goes to show that like it's Lorelai's world and we're all just living in it, and her relationships are her business and nobody else's, but everybody else's relationships are her business, and that's a pattern we see repeating for sure. But yeah, that this episode, the it should have been Lorelai, is quite interesting. But finishing it out, the last kind of scene we have is Lorelai's epiphany, shall we say. And, it's the next morning after that dinner, and Lorelai's telling Chris, I've got the whole quote here because it's just so important. It's so, again, at the heart of their whole relationship. I was just thinking, all these years, no matter what my relationship status has been, whether I've been dating or hibernating or whatever, I think I've always had you in the back of my mind. The prospect of us being together. But this prospect was sort of indefinitely on hold while you, found yourself and got your personal life together so that you could really be there for me and especially for Rory. But you and I have been so linked in my mind that I think I have unconsciously sabotaged every decent relationship I've had, including the one with Max, because I was waiting for you, and I shouldn't have been. And now that I see that, and I see you settling down with Sherry, I think I can move beyond it. And of course, Christopher's reaction is not good. Well, it's understandable, but, he's like, damn it, Lorelai, you're dumping 15 years of unhappiness on me, 15 years of not having healthy, lasting relationships on me. You're blaming me for breaking up with Max and not marrying him. That's all my fault. Like, what did you expect to come from this divine revelation that you've been so kind to share with me? Thoughts?
Like
Reaction?
I said, displacement of blame, because she cannot own up to the fact that had she done better and been more present for Christopher, that maybe they could have been a thing. But instead of just reckoning with that and saying, yeah, you know what? I should have tried harder. I did not do enough. It's about, oh, I'm happy for you because now you get to be with Sherry. I think, I always had this misguided thought of us that just could not allow us to be together. That's why I self-sabotaged all of my relationships because of you, Christopher. And Lorelai definitely is very guilty of self-sabotaging within relationships, right and left. But Christopher was not the only reason why she was doing it. But in this moment in time, she's just pinning all of that blame on him. So it's absolutely correct that Christopher is going to have that reaction and stuff to say, like, you know what? F you, Lorelai. How dare you come at me and put that on me now? Like, you suck in this moment. And he's right. It's horrible for her to just dump all of that BS and baggage at her feet at this moment in time when he finally has a good thing going for him.
Exactly. I think she was doing it to rid herself of the guilt of not being with him. What her mom said really cut her. And I think it caused her to reflect on the fact that maybe if she had done something differently, their relationship would be different and he would be more there for Rory. And so I think she does feel some guilt for that aspect of things, even if she stands firm in the fact that they were not right for each other or not going to work out when they were younger. But, this is one of those instances where the honesty is only to make you feel better, and you have to think what that honesty will give to the other person. And in this case, it gave Chris more guilt than he already feels. Like, he clearly already feels some guilt about how he behaved in Rory's early life. And, like I said a few minutes ago, we see that guilt every time he shows up. He's always like apologizing. He's trying to express and show how bad he feels that he was left out and didn't show up enough. And so to hear it out of Lorelai's mouth that like she feels like he like his immaturity in his life held her back, that's just not something you should ever say to someone. You can have that epiphany for yourself that you have been self-sabotaging because of a relationship you thought might work out, and that you had this fantasy of, the wish fulfillment of eventually marrying your kid's dad, like that's a legitimate thing. But you tell Suki, or you tell, again, God's willing, your therapist, but you do not tell Chris, and you definitely don't tell Rory. Because the other thing that happens in this conversation is Lorelai's like, hey, did you ever think about me and your dad maybe ever getting together? Like, was that something you thought about? And Rory has to deflect a little bit and be like, whatever, no, definitely not. But then she eventually is like, yeah, you know what, I thought about it, but only in the way that, like, everyone thinks about how it would be if their parents were married. It's stupid. And, you know, Lorelai rightly says, no, it's not stupid. But the fact that she asks Rory about this is, like, it's not something you should share with her, that you think that her dad might be the reason she's been self-sabotaging all these years, because it will impact how Rory feels about Chris and his behavior and how it's impacted Lorelai. So that's not something you should put on your 17-year-old daughter. That is not an appropriate conversation for them to be having.
1000% agree.
Yeah. So I guess maybe that's it for It should have been Lorelai. But I think that whole episode just goes to show that your behavior isn't always who you are. You know, who you are at your core and your values and your inherent traits toward any particular way of being, right? But the way that you're behaving in relation to others based on schemas you've adopted at some point in your life, based on how your attempts to attach to others have gone. And so I don't know that Chris is an inherently bad person. He's not probably always the person that he is around Lorelai. It seems like around other people who aren't his parents and her, he can actually be a good dude with people who don't expect him to F everything up. You know, when he is free of that background and that attachment and that disappointment that he feels was heaped on him by his parents and Lorelai, and to some level the Gilmores, he's able to just be himself and to not feel weighted down by all of that. He's able to be the kind of person he becomes with Sherry. He can be a better version of himself around her because she doesn't have these notions of him that go back to a time he was a freaking teenager. And, you know, she doesn't hold it against him that he didn't have everything together in his teens and his 20s. And that's completely reasonable. And so, again, I think that when he's around Lorelai, he's maybe not the best version of himself. And Lorelai's not the best version of herself either. It makes me think of that episode of How I Met Your Mother, where they discuss the concept of revertigo. And, you know, it's really revealed that when Lily gets together with her high school friend Michelle, she takes on a whole different, like, personality and way of speaking and way of engaging with this other person. You know, the idea that we revert back to our younger selves when we're with people from our past. The real name for it is associative regression, but, like, it's a real thing. And we see it happen very clearly with these two. And yeah, I just thought it was an interesting connection. I recently rewatched How I Met Your Mother, and so it came to mind for them because you can really see how they live very much in the past. But Sherry allows him to be the man he is now and helps him be a better version of that man by, you know, again, modeling behavior of control and discipline and structure. And she goes maybe a little too far in the opposite direction. But, you know, the end result is that Christopher does step up.
Yeah. And Sherry does good work in the time that she has until, spoiler, shit starts to hit the fan there too.
Yeah, we'll get to that in part 3. But for now, next up, the next time we see Christopher is actually in Teach Me Tonight. It's one of those, like, kind of, not quite a cameo appearance at the end, but, like, very brief appearance after all the drama has happened. And I almost forgot he was in this episode entirely. But he calls Rory in the morning, and, you know, he's just sort of cagey when it comes to Lorelai. And Rory's like, why are you two fighting? And Lorelai's like, I'm not fighting, which, again, is Lorelai being immature and not playing up to the part that she played in upsetting Christopher and placing a lot of unnecessary blame on him in the same way that her mother unnecessarily blamed her. Oh boy, that hypocrisy. Anyway, she's kind of acting here as if Chris is throwing a tantrum and like she did nothing wrong and is the bigger person, which she's not. But it's the start of her immature behavior in this episode overall, because obviously this is the one where she blows up at Luke and has no empathy for the position that he's in as Jess's guardian and the danger that Jess might be in now and his concern for him. But obviously this is a discussion about Christopher. So he shows up at night. He drives all the way from Boston on a moment's notice, drops everything to come be with them. And like, he's like, I drove here as fast as I could and I went to the hospital, but you guys had already left. So I tried your cell phone, but all I got was the voicemail. So I came here, but the place looked dark. So I got the key out of the turtle and came in, but you guys were already asleep. So I just grabbed a chair and, he shows up. He steps, like, springs into action, as Lorelai says. And he says, I'm going to deal with the car. I'm going to talk to the doctor. I'm going to need a picture of this Jess so I don't accidentally rip the head off the wrong kid. Like, he steps the F up, and Lorelai is like, I like the superhero you. And he says, just trying to keep up. And I love this episode for them. And he sticks around. He goes to the movie night with them. And I also find it interesting that he's the one who apologizes to Lorelai about the fight they had. She's like, oh, about the fight we had. Like, I didn't mean, I shouldn't have. And he was like, no, I shouldn't have. I'm sorry. And I'm like, Lorelai started this. If she had just kept her mouth shut, like, you shouldn't be sorry that she has issues when it comes to her relationships because of you. And so I thought that was, him stepping up and being the bigger person there too. So this is another one where Christopher earns a lot of points for me.
Yeah, I agree. It was a top tier dad moment. Your kid got hurt, you respond. The whole like, I want to kill Jess thing. It's like, okay, well, we can maybe just scale that back a little bit. That's not super great. But again, it's just about showing up in this moment. And he did.
Yeah, he definitely really does start to show up for Rory, even in the smaller moments, the debate, the car accident, and that continues through other stuff too, the debutante ball. But yeah, I also think this is the episode where he decides that he wants to leave Sherry, because by the baby shower, she says, oh, he was being distant and hardly ever talked. But then he came back from that wedding and he was like a changed man. And so, obviously he goes back to Boston and is suddenly changing his demeanor with her and is more distant. And I think it was this that did it. And he realized how important this was to him, and that maybe there was a shot for them if he could just break things off with Sherry. But that brings us to I Can't Get Started. How do you feel about that episode? Like, what do you think of him going with her to the wedding and them doing it the night before the wedding, and how he kind of ultimately has to leave and give up this idealized fantasy of his nuclear family with his high school sweetheart and his first daughter?
I feel bad for Gigi. Because here's a kid who now, is going to grow up with mom piecing out to Europe eventually, just dipping out of her life. Dad having to assume responsibilities when, for the first few months, the first few years, mom and dad were just a tumultuous, like, who knows even what this is anymore, because they couldn't even get it together or make it work before, like, and things were just imploding before I was even ever born. So yeah, just sympathy for Gigi. But this kind of like, it makes me think, to some of what we talked about, like in our cheating episodes, where it's like, if you're really ready to be done with a person, communicate it, tell them, it's nice to be able to, have that closure, to be able to give your partner that closure. More often than not, I feel like that's something that's not given or received. But at least with Christopher and Sherry, and Christopher definitely having the introspection to realize, like, I'm really ready to be done with Sherry here. I feel like this is where that's going. I'm not in it anymore. This is not really what I want. It's not fulfilling to me. He didn't communicate that well to her before he then turns around and gets back with Lorelai and continues on with this relationship. And it's not fair to Sherry either. So, to start, I would have said, like, just see for communication, like, just talk to each other and just say, like, hey, I'm not feeling this anymore. Are you still in this? Is this something that we want to continue to work on? Can this be repaired? Or are we ready to part ways? But we don't get that. We just get what ends up being a really, again, just horrible separation that, again, affects Gigi down the line, I'm sure, because mom and dad were never a thing from the time that I came into the world.
Yeah. Lorelai says they're in the process of breaking up. We talked about this in our cheating episode. Both of us were kind of oddly enough on the side that, like, he wasn't cheating because he was, mostly out the door. And I think he wanted to have that conversation with her in person. Otherwise, he might have just called her from Stars Hollow and been like, yeah, so I've decided that when I come back, I'm moving out. Like, that's a hard conversation to want to have over the phone. And, they were this close to breaking up. And the only thing that got them back together was Gigi's presence. And obviously Christopher was now being given the opportunity to be there. We hear him express once more, like, I missed it with Rory and I never forgave myself. So what? I'm just going to do that again. And it just goes to, again, the heart of who he is as a person. He is concerned with doing the right thing. He may not always have a finger on the pulse of exactly what the right thing is. I think, again, he's sort of conditioned by his upbringing to assume that the right thing is marriage, kids, 2.5 and a dog. That's the expectation, and doing what's right can be hard. And it's clear that he's still very much in love with Lorelai and that his heart's not in it with Sherry. But regardless, Emily says it. She calls him. She's like, I get the sense that he doesn't love this woman. He loves you. And if you said you wanted to be with him, he would leave her and he would come back to you. And Lorelai doesn't want him to do that. And that's why we see him show up in Haunted Leg. And her refusal, again, is what drives him back to her. But to his credit, he commits. He stays with her. He marries her. He's there when Gigi is born. He's kind of an absent father in the sense that, like, he's working all the time. Like, again, it's not that he's not there for Gigi because he's off in Vegas or something, gambling away all of their savings. He's out there working. He's earning a living in a job that requires him to travel. And, that's the lifestyle they chose for themselves, is that kind of job. And Sherry's staying home with the baby mostly. And that's hard for her because she's a very motivated and driven woman when it comes to her career. And that change was a big issue for her. It's a big blow to her identity as a woman. But it doesn't erase the fact that Chris was the one who tried and tried and tried and tried. And at the end of the day, he was left holding the bag when she left. And he raised Gigi. And we'll get to this in part 3 as well. But, like, when that happened, he brought Lorelai in and trusted her and included her in the process, especially once they got together and got married. He was very open with Lorelai and wanted Gigi to have a strong female figure, whether it was her mom or Lorelai or Rory or whatever. So I credit him with being committed and staying with Sherry, even when his heart maybe wasn't in it. He still tried so hard to make that relationship work. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it was Sherry who said no more.
Yeah. I mean, A for effort, but at the end of the day, it was just not meant to be between these two people. Um, and especially for the sake of their daughter at this point in time, like, you both need to be doing right by her as well. And which is why I think they tried, but when it's not there anymore. And, we'll talk about what Sherry does, but you can't fault them for calling it quits when, after the time spent trying to make it work, they both just realized that it was not a good fit anymore.
Yeah. And I would also just love to point out, in Lazy Hazy Crazy Days, when Lorelai is trying to sort of reconcile with Luke, and she's Mimi, she goes and she gives him that whole speech about, like, this is the second time I let myself do this. I just thought if he could get it together and grow up, maybe we could do it. Maybe we could be a family. And, Chris's girlfriend's going to have a baby. He's going to be there for her. He's going to marry her. He's going to be there while she's pregnant and when the child grows up. And he's going to be there while she does whatever it is she does. And I'm in exactly the same place that I was in before. And I'm just over here like, I would like to point out that you had the chance to be with him mere months before all of this, like less than a year ago, or maybe just over a year ago. And I'm in exactly the same place as I was before because you also refused to step up and to step forward in any of your relationships. I mean, granted, she didn't have to if they were not the right things, but she's so close to self-awareness. And it's just like, I don't want to say this is her fault, but again, it's something that's, within her control. If she doesn't want to be with Chris, she should not be this, like, weepy about it. It's just like, if you're not happy where you are, take a step to do something different. But you had the opportunity and you let it slip through your fingers. And I just don't know how much I can empathize with you here or sympathize with you when the option is handed to you on a silver platter and you're like, nah, but now you're over here crying about it. Like, take a stance, make a decision, draw a boundary. I don't be mad that you're still single when you had a chance at everything you ever wanted and you let it go.
Yeah, but it's just Lorelai she just doesn't know what she wants, and she doesn't know what she wants with Christopher. So until she can answer that question for herself, this is what the end result is going to be. Just a general, I don't know.
Yeah. It's just like, maybe if you were open to love and family and communication, and if you were vulnerable, if you were willing to let yourself truly open up to someone and maybe risk being hurt by someone, maybe you could have what you wanted. But you didn't take that risk. And so I don't know what to tell you here, except, you made your bed and now you have to lie in it.
Yeah, something that Lorelai Gilmore never likes hearing. So.
Never. Oh, God. I know you have a shirt that says hypocrisy. What's the wording of the quote?
Hypocrisy runs deep in the Huntsberger family.
It also runs deep in the Gilmore family. Like, we could have two versions of that shirt. But yeah, it's painful sometimes. But yeah, I guess that kind of brings us along to, the birth of Gigi and the fact that Rory is invited and she goes and she's the one who has to support Sherry through most of her labor because Sherry's friends are too busy working and too busy. Actually, no, I got to back up a little bit to the baby shower because I think that's a really interesting moment for Lorelai. She really gets to see Sherry in all of her glory. And she freaks out. But the thing that I think is the most interesting about it is that Lorelai definitely looks sad in this moment. And she is in a room full of women who have a completely different take on Christopher than she does. They see him as a great guy, husband material, father material, boyfriend material. What's that cardigan made out of? They are, they think he's going to be a great dad. And they're like, there aren't that many Christophers in the world. That's why they're all single and don't have kids yet themselves. They can't find a guy who is good and will step up and will be there for them and be dedicated. And Sherry just tells Lorelai, like, he's been great. He's so protective, and he sings to the baby, and he's just so attentive to my needs. And I credit a large part of that to you. And she doesn't understand the full context of exactly why that is. But it's just another thing Lorelai has to reckon with, where it's an outside view of Christopher that she maybe hasn't had before. And it puts him in a whole new light. And it drives, the nail deeper and hurts so much, because she's like, oh, like, why didn't I see this in him? Why didn't I take him up on his offers? Why couldn't I have this version of Christopher?
But it's on her.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing. At the end of the day, it is solely on her. So I can and do acknowledge the pain that she feels and how that can be like a real, knife in the heart at this point in time. Because now you're recognizing what you could have had with Christopher, that maybe it could have and should have been you. But it is on you at the end of the day for not allowing that to be a reality. And now it stings because you're seeing another woman getting what, at this point, I think you really want for yourself. But you don't have anyone to blame but you at that point in time.
Yeah. Very well said. But going back to Dear Emily and Richard with the birth of Gigi, and, when Chris does get to the hospital, Lorelai shows up for Rory and is supportive to Sherry, because Sherry's friends don't have kids. And she needs someone to be with her in that moment, because Chris is coming back from a business trip. She's gone into labor early. He wasn't expecting this, especially considering she had an elective scheduled C-section for like a week from then. But, he looks so excited when the nurse asks if he's going in. He's like, try and stop me. And then when he comes out, he's like, in my wildest dreams, I never could have imagined. I've never been more terrified or nauseous in my entire life. It was the most amazing thing in the world. And he's like, I'm flying. He shows off Georgia with so much pride. And then it cuts back to the moment where they're looking at Rory in the same position. And he's just like, well, I guess we should get married. And it's like, I don't think it's because he's a fundamentally different person at 17 or that he wasn't excited. But I think he knew that Lorelai was not going to let him do that. And that this was not going to be his triumphant, joyous moment of like, I'm a daddy, yay. You can see how browbeaten he was already at that. And I don't think that says anything about his love for Lorelai or even for Rory. I think it more has to do with the fact that he's like, well, I guess my lot in life is to, be the guy that you turn down. And she left a note for her own parents. And so she probably didn't call Christopher until Rory was already born. He didn't get to be there. He didn't get to be involved with any of that. And now he's finally being let in by Sherry, who wants him there, who needs his support. And Lorelai is once again just reminded of like, ooh, I could have had that.
Yeah. But again, no one to blame but you. This is a hole that you dug for yourself. Now you're not liking being in it, but you can't blame Christopher or Sherry for that. This is of your own making.
Exactly. And last but not least on this episode, and this kind of wraps us up because Christopher isn't seen again until season 5. That'll wrap us up for part 2. But last but not least is the flashback of them when they're in high school, just before she gets pregnant, or like the day that she gets pregnant. And, Chris is laying out his plans for college. And he's like, I'm going to go backpack around Europe. I'm going to sleep on a park bench and you're going to come with me, which to me shows that he wanted her in his future and that he saw that for them, and he was excited to break out and do things on his own. And my guess is that he probably wanted to do it in a way where it was just like, screw you, mom and dad. I'm going to do this on the cheap. I'm going to do it on my own terms. I'm going to take a whole year and just explore and figure out who I am. And I don't know if he ever got to do that. And like, we never get confirmation of whether he actually followed through on that plan. But we do know that Lorelai probably got the idea from him and eventually did it with Rory. And so it's just like, oh, I didn't get to do it with Chris. And so it's just like, you know, Chris wants to be a part of their lives, and he wanted Lorelai as part of his, but he was insecure and he was trying to find his own way. And we can just see that Lorelai is going to go her own way and do what she wants and not include him in any of it. Mm-hmm. She doesn't hold him to any of this. We also see them sitting on the stairs, and he's like, it doesn't sound so bad. Like, I'll marry you and I'll move in here and we'll raise the baby and it'll be okay. And she's like, no, we'll figure out how to do it on our own. She's the one who is a cheerleader for him not to be sucked into their parents' lifestyle. She knows it's not what he wants. She recognizes that in him, even if it takes him a while to verbalize that himself. But she's the one who encourages him to live his own life and then holds it against him later that he may have listened to her. And like, how long can you hold it against this guy that he was able to have the kind of 20s that most of us had?
Hypocrisy
runs deep in the Gilmore family.
And all these families. But again, like, you know, that just think about like the first scene when they come back in and, you know, she's saying like, oh, but you need to go to Princeton. I need to go to college. It's what's expected of us. And his response is like, well, no, F that. Let's go backpacking through Europe. Let's just do what we want to do. I want you by my side. And so it falls in line then with what you said. She recognizes that he doesn't want to abide by what Strobe and Francine want for him. He doesn't want to be another Hayden that just goes to Princeton and lives this white collar life and just falls into a job that probably brings in good money, but will never lead to, you know, happiness or any sort of genuine satisfaction. So when Lorelai then just tells him, you know, no, like I'm removing you from this equation, which again is just, you know, wrong for a bunch of different reasons, but I think is also, you know, really stemming from her realizing like, if I let Christopher stay, he's just going to fall into this trap of something that he doesn't even want for himself. Like you said, whether he's able to recognize it then or not. So we can say that her blocking him from Rory's life was bad. And I think, you know, it was not great. It was not the best decision that could have been made, but I think she was also doing it with his own happiness in mind. She didn't want to saddle him with that, you know, when he had more to live for at that moment in time. That's also not a great way to put it, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, he had the world at his fingertips, especially, or essentially, he had a lot of privilege that he could cash in on, and she didn't want him to lose his own future for this. She wanted to take on all of the responsibility, and she left the door open for him, at least so she thought. We'll get more into this when we talk about him as a dad in a couple weeks, but like, people wonder why he didn't, you know, fight her for custody or whatever, and I'm just like, because he didn't have to. She wouldn't have like physically prevented him from seeing her. She wouldn't withhold this child, but her lack of willingness to co-parent effectively was kind of a similar effect, and it had a lasting impact not only on his parenting of Rory, but on his romantic relationship with Lorelai herself. And so I think that's probably a good spot to leave off for this one, because we've got even more to talk about in part 3 when they actually do get together. Spoilers!
Indeed. We hope you will come back and join us for that. That's going to be a really good conversation. In the meantime, what is continuing to just inch closer and closer for us each and every coming week as we get closer into summer and fall?
have you heard the good word about the Firelight Festival? Big Gilmore Girls community fan event run by fans for fans. It's happening this October again in Guilford, Connecticut. It hasn't been there before. I'm very excited to go. We love Connecticut. We're like, yes, take us back to Connecticut now. The last 2 years it was in Maine, we went last year, which was fabulous. So I very much look forward to going again and reuniting with the Gilmore Girls fandom, because everyone is just so delightful and friendly, and the event is just such a joy. You get to meet cast and crew and fellow fans, and everyone is just so welcoming and nice. Don't hesitate to come. Even as a solo traveler, there are a lot of, like solo mixers and ways that you can get yourself involved with things. So like, don't let that dissuade you. A link to tickets is in our description box, basically at all times. There's a Facebook page. If you have any questions about the event, let us know. Drop us a comment, send us an email, message us on social media. We're happy to answer your questions. And the Facebook page is also a treasure trove of knowledge from 8 years of event attendees sharing their wisdom. So like, really don't sleep on it. It's like, the hype is so real this year. Everybody's so excited. The tickets are selling like hotcakes. It may or may not sell out. I don't know what the cap on it is, but also the more people that come and buy tickets, the more Jenny knows what to do in terms of like who to invite and how much money she's got to work with to bring people out. And, the ticket price itself is kind of steep, but it includes everything, all of like the events and the autographs. The only thing it doesn't obviously cover is your accommodations. So don't let it dissuade you. It's so worth it, and you will have so much fun. So that's a link in the description. Come join us. We're very excited, already planning for October.
Yeah, we really hope to see you there with us. It is one of the most joyous events. So do not sleep on it. Check out that link in the description below. And like Kate already said, just let us know if you have any questions. We're happy to answer. We just want as many fans as possible to be there with us that weekend.
Exactly. And yeah, on that note, please join us next week for the wrap up to this conversation. There's more Christopher discussion to be had, whether you like it or not. We're going to come back and do this again. But on that note, we'll see you next Friday for dinner.
Ciao.
Arrivederci.